Welcome back to CIA Declassified. Close your eyes and feel the air turn into a damp, heavy blanket. You are standing on a dirt landing strip in Aguacata, Honduras. To your north, the relative safety of a CIA-backed military base. To your south, the border of Nicaragua, held by the Sandinista government. The year is 1982. This is the era of the Reagan Doctrine, a time when containment has evolved into rollback. The atmosphere is thick with the scent of aviation fuel, rotting vegetation, and the smell of gun oil. This is the world of RUFUS. You're surrounded by men in mismatched olive drabs, mini-carrying Soviet-style AK-47s provided by the agency to ensure plausible deniability. The setting is one of desperate makeshift infrastructure. The jungle camps aren't fortresses. They are collections of nylon tarps and mud-slicked trenches where the line between a freedom fighter and a mercenary is as thin as the mist at dawn. You watch a C-123 provider cargo plane struggle to gain altitude over the tree line, its hold filled with non-lethal aid that everyone knows includes crates of ammunition. This is a war of dark channels where the command center is often a radio set hidden in a hollowed-out mahogany tree. The silence of the jungle is a lie. It is vibrating with the encrypted whispers of a rebellion that officially doesn't exist, led by a man the CIA knows only by a name that sounds like a common house pet, but carries the weight of a revolution. You can feel the jungle closing in. A vibrant, claustrophobic wall of green that seems to breathe in sync with the high-pitched whine of the radio towers. Every surface is coated in a fine, gritty layer of reddish clay that finds its way into your pores, your rifle's chamber, and the very tea you drink. To your left, a group of advisors in civilian polo shirts and aviator shades are hunched over a folding table, their voices low and urgent as they argue over a map that is slowly disintegrating in the 98% humidity. The heat is a physical presence, vibrating off the corrugated tin roofs of the supply sheds, while the distant staccato pop of small arms fire from the valley below serves as a constant reminder that the document signed in Washington has very real, very lethal consequences here. You are standing at the edge of a world where the sun never quite hits the floor, and where the only thing more reliable than the afternoon rain is the steady arrival of unmarked crates that smell of cosmoline and secrets. You feel the tension of the Isthmus, a narrow strip of land that has become a choke point for global ideologies. In the safe houses of Tegucigalpa, the air is cooled by fans that only move the dust around, while men in short-sleeved shirts pore over satellite photos that are still grainy and black and white. You are witnessing the invention of action in real time. The moment when a government decides that if the law won't allow a war, they will simply build one in the shadows. Every supply drop into the Mosquitia, M-O-S-Q-I-T-I-A, Mosquitia region is a heartbeat for a movement that is being kept alive by a transfusion of secret funds. The atmosphere is heavy with the weight of geography, and these mountains, a kilometer of distance, is measured in hours of climbing, and the only high ground is the one you can defend until the next tropical downpour. There is a specific scent to this operation, a mixture of stale sweat, cheap tobacco, and the ozone of high-powered radio transmitters. You see the faces in the eyes of the Contra commanders, men who believe they are reclaiming their country, unaware that back in the District of Columbia, they are viewed as a functional variable in a larger Cold War equation. The jungle doesn't care about your findings or your executive orders, but it will hold your secrets long after the mud has reclaimed the airstrips. Why the name? In the lexicon of the Directorate of Operations, RUFUS was not a random choice. While most CIA cryptonyms use a two-letter digraph to indicate a geographic or functional area, RUFUS was a specific high-level identifier for the individual leadership nucleus of the counter-revolutionary movement. The origin traces back to the Latin root rufus, meaning red or ruddy. Historically, it was a Roman nickname for those who were resistant or fiery. For the agency, it served as a mask for the consolidated leadership of the Nicaraguan Democratic Force. It was an invention of action, a designation created to centralize control over a fragmented group of rebels, transforming them from a ragtag band into a unified asset that could be tracked, funded, and, if necessary, liquidated. To calculate the exact friction point where a jungle insurgency grinds into a global scandal, we must inspect every individual tooth in the machine's gearbox. RUFUS was initiated as a formal action in 1981 following a presidential finding signed by Ronald Reagan. The operation was managed by the CIA's Latin American Division. It provided an initial $19 million in covert aid, which eventually ballooned into hundreds of millions. The action utilized non-attributable weapons, often sourced from international arms dealers, to bypass the Boland Amendment. RUFUS organized the Contras into a force of over 15,000 fighters at its peak. The program utilized black fights from Ilopango Air Base in El Salvador. It provided the rebels with red-eye shoulder-fired missiles to counter Sandinista helicopters. RUFUS used clandestine radio stations like Radio 15 to broadcast propaganda. The system tracked the Soviet cargo ships docking in the port of Corinto. It utilized psychological operations manuals, which later became public and caused an international outcry. RUFUS was active during the secret arms for hostages negotiations. The program utilized encrypted burst transmitters to communicate between jungle camps and Langley. It documented the presence of Cuban military advisors. RUFUS utilized dead drops in the markets of San Jose, Costa Rica. The program mapped the Sandinista supply lines running from the Pacific coast. It utilized electronic intelligence gathered by U.S. Navy ships off the coast of Nicaragua. RUFUS allowed for the aerial reconnaissance of the Humberto Ortega military installations. The system utilized night vision goggles, Generation 1, to facilitate midnight river crossings. It reduced the Sandinista government's economic output by forcing them into a total war footing. RUFUS was utilized as a pressure point to prevent the spread of Marxist influence in the American backyard. The program experimented with underwater sabotage to mine Nicaraguan harbors. It utilized safe houses in Miami for Contra political leaders. RUFUS documented the internal purges within the Sandinista Directorate. The system utilized remote sensors to monitor movement along the Coco River. RUFUS was integrated into the National Security Council enterprise run by Oliver North. The pods of data collected were used to target Nicaraguan fuel depots in 1983. The project used aviation front companies like Southern Air Transport. RUFUS identified the logistical vulnerabilities of the Sandinistas' first territorial militia. The program utilized false manifests for cargo flights supposedly carrying medical supplies. It tracked the financial flow of private donations through Swiss bank accounts. RUFUS utilized human intelligence from former Sandinistas who defected to the north. The software, early mainframe, mapped tribal alliances of the Miskito Indians. It identified infiltrators sent by the Sandinistas' DGSE. RUFUS utilized microfilm cameras to smuggle troop movements out of the country. The program used counterfeit currency to destabilize the Nicaraguan currency. It identified secret T-55 tank storage facilities provided by the Soviets. RUFUS utilized tactical mapping of the northern border's salient zones. The project mapped the hidden submarine pens, suspected, on the Atlantic coast. It utilized signature analysis of Sandinista radio nets to predict upcoming offensives. RUFUS documented the recruitment rates of the Sandinista youth wings. The program utilized divisionary raids on the Bluefields coast. It identified weak points in the Nicaraguan national power grid. RUFUS utilized front organizations in the U.S. to lobby for continued rebel funding. The system tracked seasonal snowmelt to schedule high-risk airdrop missions. It identified the fuel grade used by Nicaraguan patrol boats to track their range. RUFUS utilized black propaganda to create friction between the Sandinistas and the Catholic Church. The program identified underground bunkers beneath the Intercontinental Hotel. It utilized behavioral modeling to predict the reaction of Daniel Ortega to U.S. sanctions. RUFUS mapped the microwave towers because they were critical for military telecommunications. The system identified vulnerable points in the government's bridge infrastructure. It utilized leaflet drops over Esteli and Matagalpa. RUFUS tracked the smallpox vaccination records to identify troop rotations in the north. The program utilized infrared strobes to mark landing zones in total darkness. It identified clandestine strips capable of landing L-100 Hercules aircraft. RUFUS was offshored to private entities after the 1984 congressional ban. A quote, which is listed as the public justification for the initial RUFUS finding dated 1981, but it doesn't say who said the quote, just that it was used for public justification. "We are not there to overthrow the government, but to stop the flow of arms to El Salvador." A quote from President Ronald Reagan in a 1985 speech, "The Contra is the moral equivalent of our founding fathers." A declassified field report from a CIA contract employee in Honduras, an independent contractor. "There is no such thing as humanitarian aid in a jungle war. There is only survival or defeat." Declassified cable to the U.S. Embassy. "We are providing the shield so that the democratic process can have a chance to breathe." Declassified CIA intelligence assessment dated 1983. "The agency's objective is to make the coast of Sandinista rule in Nicaragua more than the Soviet Union is willing to pay." A quote that is an excerpt from the National Security Decision Directive, NSDD 77. "It is the intent of the United States to support the democratic resistance in Nicaragua by all appropriate means." And a declassified internal memorandum regarding the enterprise logistical structure. "Operations must be conducted with the maximum degree of plausible deniability to protect the executive branch from legislative blowback." End quote. Within the final review of the RUFUS paramilitary support program, a massive 112 pages titled Financial Synchronization and Non-State Revenue are entirely blacked out. These redactions are protected under Exemption B1 for national security. I suspect these pages detail the agency's direct knowledge and facilitation of the narcotics for arms pipeline, the bridge between the cartel and the Contras supply network. I think that maybe the redacted portions cover airfield immunity protocols, like explicit orders to U.S. Customs and the DEA to allow Contra-associated aircraft to land at southern U.S. bases without inspection. I think the redactions likely hide the shadow payroll as well, the names of foreign officials who were paid millions in diversion funds to look the other way while tons of white powder were swapped for crates of green rifles. I'm not the only one with theories. In the jungle, the truth is a ghost that disappears as soon as you look at it directly. For instance, there's the engineered epidemic theory. It's a persistent one that claims the CIA used RUFUS as a supply network to intentionally flood U.S. inner cities with crack cocaine as a dual-purpose tool to fund the Contras and to destabilize domestic political opposition. Then there's the October surprise speculation. Some believe that the RUFUS leadership was used as a secret back channel to ensure that the Iranian hostages weren't released until after the 1980 election, with Contra support being the promised thank you payment. Then there's the shadow government theory. Conspiracy enthusiasts suggest that RUFUS was the beta test for a permanent off-the-books American intelligence agency that operate entirely outside the oversight of the president and Congress. And then there is the hidden gold of the native and indigenous people. It's a whisper that the leadership used the jungle camps to extract and smuggle out millions in unrefined gold from the indigenous territories, funneling it into a private war chest that remains buried somewhere in the Isthmus today. Was RUFUS a success? Tactically, it was a logistical nightmare turned precision tool. By 1986, RUFUS had successfully turned a group of disorganized ex-National Guardsmen into a 20,000-man army that could strike anywhere in Nicaragua. It was a success because it forced the Sandinistas to spend 50% of their national budget on defense, effectively bankrupting the socialist experiment. It proved that deep penetration resupply could be achieved in a hostile jungle environment using outdated civilian aircraft. Tactically, it turned the Aguacata airstrip into one of the busiest and most secret hubs in the Western Hemisphere. Beyond the battlefield, the success lay in the automation of the underworld. The agency created a seamless global logistics chain that could move millions of dollars and tons of equipment across continents with no paper trails. This tactical breakthrough allowed for the infiltration of the ungovernable, placing assets in the most remote corners of the world and keeping them operational through deniable aviation. This victory for the CIA was the realization that they could manage a full-scale war as a private franchise, effectively outsourcing the violence and the risk while retaining total control of the strategic outcome. Strategically, it was kind of a pariah of a victory. It achieved its core goal. It prevented the consolidation of a Soviet-aligned military powerhouse in Central America. It proved that the U.S. could successfully conduct a war of attrition without committing American ground troops. However, it also led to the Contras scandal, which nearly toppled the Reagan presidency and led to the most significant congressional oversight of the CIA in history. RUFUS left a legacy of instability in the region that persists to this day. The deeper strategic impact was the birth of privatized intelligence and using that as a model. RUFUS demonstrated that a superpower doesn't need a formal army to achieve its goals. It only needs a dark network of independent contractors, pilots, front companies, and regional proxies. This shifted the paradigm of American power from direct intervention to structural subversion. Even the exposure of the operation was a strategic lesson. It taught the agency how to redact the soul of a project, keeping the core mechanics secret, even when the surface details were being debated on the nightly news. The Contras were the scalpel, the Sandinistas were the patient, and the CIA was the surgeon who left no fingerprints. As far as operational and technological breakthroughs go, it led to quite a few, such as low visibility supply integration, which was engineered to merge clandestine cargo with legitimate commercial traffic in high-risk zones. For humanity today, this logic supports the just-in-time delivery systems used by global e-commerce and the rapid deployment of emergency aid during civil unrest. The military applies it to force projection in disputed territories, and the intelligence community uses it to mask the transit of sensitive tech through established trade corridors. Clandestine financial node synchronization was developed to facilitate the rapid movement of unvouchered funds across international borders. For humanity today, this is the precursor to this decentralized finance, networks, and encrypted transaction layers used in modern banking, while the military utilizes it for funding local security initiatives in remote areas, and the intelligence community uses it to maintain operational autonomy from standard fiscal oversight. Then there's the advanced vegetative penetration analysis, which was refined to track insurgent infrastructure through dense tropical canopy. For humanity today, this powers the hyperspectral imaging used for global forest health monitoring and carbon credit verification. The military utilizes it for detecting camouflage positions and river warfare, and the intelligence community uses it for identifying hidden production facilities that are invisible to standard optical satellites. And then distributed proxy command architecture, which was created to manage multinational paramilitary forces through decentralized communication hubs. For humanity today, this logic governs the coordination of massive borderless volunteer networks and open source intelligence collectives, while the military applies it to partner force synchronization in coalition environments, and the intelligence community utilizes it for managing stay-behind networks that remain dormant until triggered by specific regional shifts. The echoes of the Central American campaign continue to vibrate through the modern landscape of security. It was an era that proved how traditional structures could be bypassed through sheer ingenuity and the clever use of non-state actors. The result was a world where influence is exerted through a series of interlocking invisible gears that turn without the need for public permission. The true weight of the operation lies in its ability to persist long after the official documents were supposedly destroyed. We look back at the jungle camps not as a historical anomaly, but as a laboratory for the ways power is projected today. The infrastructure built in those mud-slick trenches wasn't just physical. It was an intellectual framework for how to manage global events from the darkness of a secure terminal. The legacy of the hidden hand is written in the silence of those who witnessed the arrival of the unmarked planes. It remains a stark example of how a superpower can reshape a continent's future by simply adjusting the flow of resources in the background. As the jungle overgrows the airstrips, the methods perfected there have moved into the digital realm, continuing to shape our world in ways we are only beginning to understand. In the jungle, the loud noises are meant to distract you from the quiet ones. Never trust a pilot who is getting paid in cash on a dirt runway. The most expensive thing in the world is a free revolution. And remember, the hand is only hidden until it's time to strike. Thanks for listening, and join us next time as we examine QR Pane, the high-precision operation for the monitoring of foreign glass and optic manufacturing. We'll look at the laser research labs of the Eastern Bloc, the secret optical grinding techniques of the Soviets, and the reality of a war fraught through the lens of a microscope. Join us next time for the Eye of the Glass Ghost. In the meantime, I'll see you in the archives.